Well, everyone, I just wanted to say a few words about our first reading from Michael Gold's Jews Without Money. I hope you had a chance to read the announcement I sent out. I have thought about this book for many years, actually, and thought about using it in intellectual heritage. And I didn't because I think the language of it was just it was too much for me. I mean, you know what I mean. And like I said in the announcement, I don't feel like I'm here to ruin anybody's day or to um, make anybody feel exposed or offended. I mean, it's just not what I do as a teacher. So why am I assigning it now? I don't know. I mean, I think I've come to the point where I think it's up to students to decide the value of books. I mean, that is, there's things in books that are offensive or disturbing, and it's up to us to decide whether it's worth reading or not. So I did say in the announcement that if you're considering the thing that the issues that if you feel like reading something else, if this is not for you, that's fine. Just let me know, and we'll have you read something else comparable that doesn't contain the kind of problematic issues that this book does. But that being said, I really like this book, um, and part of it I think is because of the kind of scene that he sets here in the opening. What was it like to grow up on the Lower East Side of New York City in the early part of the century? I think the book was written around 1930. So one would think that the time that he's writing about was maybe around 1910. I mean, very, sort of old New York and old immigrant New York and old Jewish New York. He grows up in a chaotic place, a poor, chaotic place. I can never forget the East Side Street where I lived as a boy. Uh, It never slept. It roared like a sea. It exploded like fireworks. People pushed and wrangled in the street. There were armies of howling pushcart peddlers. Women screamed, dogs barked and copulated, babies cried. A parrot cursed, ragged kids played under truck horses, whatever truck horses are. Fat housewives fought from stoop to stoop, a beggar sang. At the livery stable, coach drivers lounged on a bench. They hee-hawed with laughter. They guzzled cans of beers. Pimps, gamblers, and red-nosed bums. Peanut politicians, pugilists and sweaters. Tin-horn sports and tall longshoremen in overalls. An endless pageant of East Side life passed through the wicker doors of Jake Wolf's saloon. It's just all very picturesque, and I suppose to give you a little background on me explaining myself, I grew up in the suburbs, Philadelphia suburbs, and but my parents and pretty much all the adults that I knew grew up in the city, had moved to the suburbs. And I'm not saying that they grew up in neighborhoods exactly like the Lower East Side of New York, but they weren't all that different. Those urban neighborhoods with that were poor but somehow rich too, rich in experience, rich in human types, in which it seemed to me a lot of things meant more than they meant in the community where I grew up, especially religion. Um, one of the things that he says right away, talking about, these, this is on page, just the beginning of it, the Jews had fled from European pogroms. If you don't know what a pogrom is, it's a massacre. It's an anti Semitic massacre. I don't know exactly what language it's from, but it's the killing of Jewish people in Europe, Eastern Europe, and it's the kind of thing that the Jews were getting away from when they came to America. The Jews had fled from the European pogroms with prayer, thanksgiving, and solemn faith from a new Egypt into a new promised land. They have found waiting them. They found awaiting them the sweatshops, the bawdy houses, and Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was the political machine that controlled New York City, or at least parts of it at the time. There were hundreds of prostitutes on my street. They occupied vacant stores, they crowded into flats and apartments and all the tenements. The pious Jews hated the traffic, but they were pauper strangers here. They could do nothing. They shrugged their shoulders and murmured, "This is America." They tried to live. So the sort of contrasts, between criminality and law abidingness, between squalor and religion. I guess I've always found those things fascinating, and those are the kind of things that exists, at least seem to exist more in cities. Those kind of contrasts, and the kind of place where I grew up, the suburbs, which didn't really have that kind of culture, and certainly not that street culture. I was always fascinated when I did come into the city, Philadelphia, especially, by the concentration of people, concentration of stores, the sense in which the sidewalks were almost like theaters, different human types. And so I guess ultimately, I mean, this book has a lot of stuff going on in it, obviously, not just the problematic things about the language, which is racist language, there's no doubt about it. He also uses, as a Jewish person's, anti Semitic language. You know, I guess he couldn't have written about his neighborhood without writing that way, because that's the way that people spoke. That was, I don't know if how much he regretted it, but that's the way people spoke about people of different ethnicities. And in writing about the sexual exploitation, the prostitution, I guess he couldn't have written about his childhood without writing about that. It was part of his neighborhood. And again, part of that contrast. He comes from a family, his mother and father sending him to Hebrew school, sending him to public school, trying to, keep the family together, but cheek by jowl with prostitution and criminality. That was part of the story. And a lot of it is very raw. There's no question about it. But that's what he's writing about. And that criminality and that exploitation is a huge part of it. I mean, he's a communist. There's no doubt about it, right? Isn't he? The writer himself. But there's this line here. I mean, basically, the young women who arrive in America who have nothing, they have the choice. I mean, if they're lucky, they have some choice, but the choice is to go become a prostitute or to go into the sweatshops, basically become an industrial laborer under the worst conditions. And some of them choose prostitution as the lesser of two evils. That exploitation of people, and especially exploitation of women in this book, is just a huge part of life. But I don't know where the line is, but there's this incredible line about America being rich and fat, but it's rich and fat because it has, you see, more. I mean, that's the worst anti-Semitic thing there too. His teacher calls him that. Uh, if you're Jewish, you know that word. Yeah, I mean, it's a raw account of a very raw world. And yeah, there's something in here, about really, really kind of an immortal line that if America is rich and fat, it's because it's fed off the blood of immigrants. You know, and here's the world in which people are being exploited. So, I think it's a very striking book.